What's up, everybody? If you're new around here, I'm Zapper, the Immortal 3 Yapper. I peaked around like 580 RR, and I've been one win off Radiant a few times now. Today, I put together 7 high impact tips that will get you out of ELO hell. If you're anywhere from iron, bronze, silver, or honestly even gold, then mastering these 7 tips will completely transform your gameplay. I'm going to start you all off with the fundamentals that are basically a requirement to master before you can escape low elo, and then work my way up to some more unique tips that will help push your in-game impact to the next level. Number 1, aim. Good aim can single-handedly carry someone from low elo to high ascendant. Sprinkle in a solid understanding of each weapon, mediocre movement with just a tad of game sense dribbled on top, and I bet you could make it there in less than a month. If you're in low elo, you are either new to the game, hard stuck, or you simply don't play enough. It doesn't matter which group you fall under. By the end of this video, you will have all the tools you need in order to rank up. It's 2024 now, and climbing out of low elo is much harder than it was 3 years ago. By grinding aim trainers super hard, you can definitely climb out of low elo pretty quickly, and if you're looking to take your aim training to the next level, I have tons of videos covering exactly how to do that. Aim training isn't the only way though. I know lots of players find aim training boring, and fortunately, once your aim is at a decent level, climbing through the ranks becomes possible through other means that I'll be covering in this video. Guns in Valorant have recoil, and so at longer distances, it's important to tap fire or burst fire your gun. If you're moving, your bullets are going to be less accurate, so most of the time you should make sure you have fully stopped before shooting. When at close range, spraying is often very viable, and so it's important you practice your spray control in the range with weapons you use most frequently in ranked. When I was playing low elo a few years back, I would spend about 5 minutes in the range each day before playing. Half the time I would spend tap firing the bots, the other half would be spent working on my spray control. Follow this up with at least one deathmatch before queuing up for ranked, and voila, you have a super solid warm-up that will easily get your Valorant aim to a respectable level. And don't forget, aiming is a hand-eye coordination skill, so you should be focusing on the target while aiming. Just as it's harder to catch a flying object if you're not looking at it, the same thing applies for aiming in FPS games. Number 2, movement. Okay, so movement, I think it's a little bit overhyped in my opinion. You could definitely get to high elo without having great movement, and I would never unbind my crouch in order to stop the habit of crouch spraying. Here it is, plain and simple. The most popular movement style consists of 2 bullet bursts and strafes in between. To do this, simply stop moving, shoot 2 bullets, move again, stop, shoot, rinse and repeat. If you want to peak at maximum movement speed, you need to press only your A or only your D key. Something no one talks about, however, is that sometimes it's better to peak with W if that means you can trade your team out quicker. Similarly, if during your strafes you are holding W or S, you will be a much easier target to kill. That's why people call it AD spamming, because you have to use only A or D, you can't press anything else. Another important aspect to consider when peaking is your distance from the wall. When you are close to the wall, you will move faster on the enemy screen, but you have to peek out wider in order to see the same area on the map, which can sometimes result in the enemy seeing you before you see them. When further from the wall, it's the opposite. It's honestly situational, and I'd say being unpredictable is the most important factor here. Just keep in mind that the distance from the wall you are will also affect the elevation your head is at on the enemy screen, which makes crosshair placement harder. Crouching is good situationally as well because it can throw off the enemy crosshair placement and even helps you control your gun spray. The downside is that after you crouch, your movement's much more predictable. So if you crouch, then miss a couple shots, you're pretty much guaranteed to die. Walking is super good for concealing information. Most of the time, if you're trying to outplay your enemy, you should be walking around the map and just peeking slightly to clear angles. If you let go of shift and just tap your A and D keys, you can move for a couple steps without making any noise, and that's how people clear angles without letting the enemy know where they're at with sound cues such as stepping. Jump peeking is also super good for safely gathering info without wasting any utility. Other movement techniques that can be powerful would be wide swinging, close peeking, jiggle peeking, shoulder peeking, windmill peeking, and even crouch peeking. Mastering these techniques are not necessary for climbing out of low elo, but you will get some benefit out of them, and I'm sure as you play the game naturally, you will get familiar with them. The main takeaway here is that there's no single movement style or peeking technique that is better than the rest. Good movement is instead a balance of fast and slow, fast enough to pressure the enemy, but slow enough to be unpredictable. angle. As you climb, you'll get a better feel for how fast is good and how slow is bad. I'd say the best indicator for the speed you should be going is going to be how fast your team is going. Number 3, crosshair placement. Likely the most important topic in this video. The main thing people will get wrong with crosshair placement is something I actually brought up earlier in this video. The distance the enemy is away from the angle you are peeking or holding affects your crosshair placement greatly. Yes, head height is often different, but it affects lots of other things as well, which always gets overlooked. Good crosshair placement results in easier kills because it minimizes the required mechanics for a kill. Small adjustments are much easier and more consistent than long flicks. Not to mention, they take less time to execute. This means keeping your crosshair placement at head height and the correct distance from the wall when holding and peeking. Some coaches explain it as holding with tight crosshair placement versus wide crosshair placement, but this is actually a bad way to think about it. Instead, you should be taking into account how far or close the enemy is to the angle when taking your fights, and then adjust accordingly. Basically, when the enemy's farther from the wall, you can hold a little bit tighter, and if they're peeking really close to the wall, you should hold wider. It's basically just the inverse of what I was talking about earlier in the movement section. When you're farther from the wall, you're not going to move as fast, so you can actually hold it a little bit tighter, and when players are closer to the wall, they're going to be moving faster, so you need to hold wider in order to account for your reaction time. Number 4, utility usage. Without utility, Valorant wouldn't be Valorant. In order to truly master utility, it's best to stick to mastering one agent, or at the very least, just one role at a time. The first time I climbed to Immortal, I was an Omen one trick, only playing other controllers on necessary maps. If I didn't get smokes, I would fill. I can make an agent specific or role specific video if you guys are interested, but for the sake of this video, just make sure all utility you use has a goal in mind. Whether it's a Sova drone to clear out shotguns close, Omen smoke to block off enemy sight lines, Killjoy ult to clear out sight, etc. I often find that throwing out utility before peeking an angle will generally increase your odds of winning any given duel, unless you have the element of surprise. In this case, it's better to just not use your utility because it gives away your location, similar to how you want to walk around when trying to outplay enemies. I would highly recommend watching agent specific guides or even watching pro players in ranked, and not only copy their utility usage, but also try to understand their reasoning behind doing certain things. Number 5, teamwork. Teamwork in Valorant is super easy. You don't even have to talk to your team if you don't want to in order to have good team play. On attack side, simply copy what your team is doing. If they're pushing fast, then push fast with them. If they're pushing slow, then push slow with them. This includes timing your utility when taking sights. You should be holding your utility until your team is all ready to throw out their utility at the same time. It's way too often I see one player run out before anyone's ready, making the sight take much harder. If your jet dashes in before your Sova darts and your Omen smokes, they're just going to be a sitting duck for the 3 players who are holding them. On defense or post plant, glance at the minimap and pick a teammate. You should now try to play with this teammate, fight for space with them if they're pushing, set up crossfires if they're camping in a corner, play off their contact, get creative with it. This also means that if your team's not with you, playing retake is often a good idea. I find that it's really hard to 1v5 on site, especially if you're playing a duelist. You know, if you're on Cypher, you can do it, but it's your own discretion because sometimes it still doesn't work, especially if they break your trips. And a big thing for teamwork is to not bait your teammates. Not baiting is pretty easy. If your team's fighting, just run and try to help them fight. It's as simple as that. Just try to get there as fast as you can. If you're hiding in a corner while they're fighting because you're scared, that's what people call baiting. Number 6, communication. As I said, communication isn't a requirement for good team play, but it does make it a whole lot easier. Oftentimes, you want to fight enemies, take space, or really just do anything in general. By just letting your team know ahead of time, the chances of winning the round increase. Even if your team doesn't help you out, this will give your team more time to adapt. Don't overcomplicate things here though. Good communication requires just a few things. Communicate when you see enemies, where you see enemies, how many you see, and any utility that's being used. An example would be jet dashed, A-site, oh, Raze is heaven, Sova's darting, etc, etc. Communicate. Another important thing to do is communicate strategies to your team, especially when basic strategies like rushing or defaulting aren't working. It's okay if your strats fail. At the very least, it keeps the morale up knowing that someone is trying to win the game even when you're down several rounds. Many times, just one good strat can completely turn a game around. And of course, be positive, guys, like excessively positive. Don't say anything that might hurt someone's ego on your team, because this will cause tilt, which scientifically reduces performance. If you want a high win rate, the best case scenario is that everyone on your team is focused and feeling good. This means hyping anybody who is doing really good. If they clutch a 1v5, hype them up. And if someone does bad, don't say anything. Sometimes I even like asking my team, hey, what do you guys think we should do? This gives other players a chance to add input into future rounds when you can't think of a solution yourself. Someone with good comms can carry a game, literally with just comms. Put together good strategies, keep team morale high, and clearly communicate in-game events, and boom, your bot teammates have more brain power to put towards going 0-35. And last but not least, guys, high elo strategies. Here's the part of the video where I teach you simple strategy that high elo players utilize every game that increases their odds of winning any given round. Yep, even if your aim is shit, by implementing these strategies, your win rate will increase. The biggest advantage you can get in a match of Valorant is a numbers advantage. If you have more players alive than the enemy, the round instantly becomes much harder for your opponents. Way too often, I see players completely toss their advantage away by pushing into the enemies one by one or just getting overly aggressive in general. If you're really looking to increase your win rate and rank up, start paying more attention to when your team's up in numbers. If you have a 5v4, instantly let your team know and then play more passively. Be like, hey guys, we got numbers, like let's play back a little bit. Something like that. And this is good to do on defense. But if you're on offense, you want to group up together and hit a site because you have numbers now. So let's say you get a pick mid, you should walk to A site, tell your team, and then boom, hit A site together. On the contrary, if your team's down in numbers, it can often be beneficial to play overly risky in order to try and even out the playing field. I'm not saying take fights on your own or fights that you'll definitely lose, but you get the idea, like pushing up spawn to catch the enemies off guard because it's a little too aggressive. This can work and it can even out the numbers, especially if you can get out afterwards. When on defense, if your team can't seem to hold A site, for example, then you should play heavier A with extra players or ask if your sentinel is willing to switch sites. If you are scared your team will get mad at you for asking this, maybe just be like, hey guys, can we try switching things up? They seem to be really favoring A site, or their A site hits are like really strong. Can someone else help me out over here? This increases your chances of shutting down the push if they do decide to go A again. And oftentimes all it takes is one strong defensive round to turn the tide back in your favor. Another huge mistake lots of players make is getting too aggressive on post plant. Once you get the bomb down on attacker side, you gain a huge advantage. All of a sudden, the defenders have to fight against the clock before the spike goes boom boom. To utilize this advantage, it's good to set up for post plant ahead of time. This means don't peek overly aggressively. If you're on an aggressive angle, just do your best to stay alive as long as you can to kill the clock. If you're playing more passive angle, try to play the spike timer a little bit more. Play back, wait for taps on the bomb, jiggle peek, jump peek, throw your utility out. You don't really even have to get any kills here as long as you can stall the defenders long enough. Just think about it. They need to defuse the spike for an entire 7 seconds, and it's only ticking down for 45 seconds total. During the time they are defusing, they can't even shoot back at you. This makes things super difficult. Main thing to watch out here are smokes. If the enemy does use their smokes to smoke off the bomb, try to save some of your utility to clear them off the bomb, since peeking out is going to be more difficult. And if you want to be cringe, learn some lineups on Viper, Brimstone, anybody with a molly, and you can stall out the bomb for free.